Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. Sorry to keep you guys waiting, but you know me, busy. Anyway, what were we talking about? So we're finally finishing off our fighter analysis, and we're kicking things off with the Arcane Archer. Arcane Archer lore starts you off with your choice of either Arcana or Nature skills. Additionally, you gain the cantrip of either Prestidigitation or Druidcraft. These options aren't groundbreaking by any stretch of the imagination, but they do help to add a little bit of context to how you became an Arcane Archer or where you originally came from in the first place. As such, it's probably worth making decisions based on the character backstory you've written. It helps to add a little bit of depth and realism to the character that you've made. So your Arcane Shot grants you 2 Arcane Shot options of your choice. Additionally, when you hit level 7, 10, 15 and 18, you get an additional Arcane Shot option, for a total of 6. But considering the fact that you only have 8 to pick from in the first place, it's not really that varied. So you can use an Arcane Shot option once per attack, and you have 2 uses of it per rest. What is nice about the Arcane Shot options though is that when you choose to apply one of your effects, you can apply it after you've hit the target, so you don't end up wasting any. This mitigation helps a little bit, but it doesn't really cushion the blow of having so few uses of it per day. Magic Arrow gives you the ability to enchant your non-magical arrows so that you can overcome things like resistances and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. Really useful in one of those low magic campaigns where getting hold of an enchanted bow is a bit difficult. This ability loses its effectiveness, however, once you do get hold of a magical weapon, but if you lose it for any reason, at least you still have a backup strategy. Curving Shot is where it gets really interesting. If you miss your initial target, you can spend a bonus action to re-roll the attack roll and hit a target within 60 feet of the original target. This is absolute madness because it just says within 60 feet. It doesn't say in a straight line, it doesn't say line of effect, it doesn't even say anything about cover. It simply says within 60 feet of the original target, meaning that you can potentially make shots that other archers would just have no hope of hitting. While this ability does require your bonus action to use, there's no upper limit on how often you can use it, so it's pretty much always available when you need it. An absolutely amazing addition to the class, and it just allows you so much freedom and versatility, and it really works well when combined with certain things like Sharpshooter, for example. Those big penalties that are going to make it more likely for you to miss just allow you to use this ability to hit another target and potentially get some decent damage on that instead. If you roll initiative and you don't have any of your Arcane Shot uses left, Ever Ready Shot will allow you to then regain 1 use of it at the beginning of your initiative. These abilities usually suck. They tend to just be filler in my opinion. It takes away the necessity of having to write an interesting or different type of ability. On the other hand, however, when it comes to this particular archetype, the amount of times you're likely to run out of Arcane Shots, you'll probably see a lot more usage with this than you think. That's providing, of course, you can actually get to level 15 when you get this ability. That's an awful long grind for an archetype that's not offering you anything decent after level 7. So finally we got onto the Arcane Shot options. Some of these are really good, but a lot of them also require a save to be made. Now your saving throws are based on your intelligence modifier, so intelligence is going to have to be something you're going to have to prioritize as an Arcane Archer as well as the fact you want a good dexterity and you probably want to have a reasonable constitution as well. Also at level 18 all of your Arcane Shot options get an upgrade, but again that's a really long way to go in order to get a little bonus to something that you're only able to use a couple of times per rest. Banishing Arrow is great when you need that little bit of extra time. Anything that fails to save against it is going to leave the battlefield until the end of its next turn. So when it appears it doesn't even get to do anything. Great if you need to reposition, great if you need to regroup, so potentially very good. The damage boost at top end doesn't really do it for me. I would have maybe preferred to have the thing banished for an extra round or maybe have it more difficult to resist the save, I don't know. Perhaps add disadvantage to the saving throw, something like that, but unfortunately a little bit of extra damage, not really to my taste. If I'm going to be using Banishing Arrow as a crowd controlling option, then I want a crowd controlling effect as my bonus at level 18, not really an extra bit of damage. You can make a similar argument for Beguiling Arrow. At least Beguiling Arrow deals a lot more damage. You get the initial 2d6 as well as the charm effect, but at level 18 you gain 4d6 additional damage, so that's a really nice bonus. I just wish I could take this ability a little bit more seriously. I can't help but feel like Cupid every time someone fires an arrow with the enchantment effect on it. While this ability is potentially good for taking some of the heat off of one of your allies, I'm thinking that perhaps the monster is going to be less concerned with just how charming it finds them, and more concerned with who just shot it in the rear. Alright, moving on to Bursting Arrow. Now we're talking a bit of an AoE action going on. So you get a 10-foot radius around the hit target, which deals 2d6 damage and 4d6 damage instead when you hit level 18. So this is a nice little bit of area damage that you can put out as an archer. The nice thing about Bursting Arrow is that there's no save against it, so everything in the area is gonna take a hit. Enfeebling Arrow will half the damage from weapon attacks from any target that fails its save. However, it's a constitution save, and considering it's based on weapon attacks, characters going toe-to-toe with weapons usually have a decent constitution anyway, so it might be difficult to get this effect to stick. It's potentially good for big bad multi-hitting targets, but you just don't want to be using it for your day-to-day jobbers. There's just no benefit in doing so. Damage is quite reasonable on this, an extra 2d6 or an extra 4d6 at level 18. Still, the debuff only lasts until the beginning of your next turn, so how much mileage you get out of this really depends on just how many attacks the creature you're fighting is putting out. So Grasping Arrow I really like. You get the 2d6 additional poison damage, the creature is covered in brambles giving it a 10-foot speed reduction, and the first time it moves it will also take 2d6 points of slashing damage. Of course, these are upgraded to 4d6 for both poison and slashing respectively at level 18, but the control on this attack alone is just brilliant. The slowdown is really nice, the extra damage is always there, but even if the creature is trying to avoid extra damage by not moving, that 1 minute duration on those brambles is a long time to be stood around in the same spot. All these effects with no saving throw against it, absolutely fantastic. Probably the best of the arcane shot options in my opinion. So your Piercing Arrow is a 30-foot line effect. You don't make any attack rolls. The creatures just get a saving throw against it. Otherwise they just take damage from the arrow as normal, plus an additional d6 on top of that, or an additional 2d6 on top if you're level 18. The unfortunate thing about this is because you're not making attack rolls, you can't get extra damage from things like Sharpshooter. So you're not going to be getting any benefit from that. You might be able to get damage in other ways, but essentially if you're relying on the creature making a saving throw against this, then it's potentially not as good as say something like Bursting Arrow. If you're in a classic Dungeon Bash scenario, however, you might find some extra use in this. Those long corridors are really good for these line effect kind of spells and abilities, so you'll probably get a lot more use out of that in those confined spaces than out in the open. Additionally, even if the enemies do make their saving throws, they're still taking half damage, so at least you're still getting something out of it. But what's really nice about this ability is the fact that it just passes through objects and cover like it wasn't even there. You can potentially hit things in other rooms without even trying. You just got to love Seeking Arrow, don't you? It's the medieval version of Nikita missiles for all you Metal Gear fans out there. This effect is really great. You can even use it with things like Sharpshooter. The creatures do get a saving throw. They take only half damage if they make it, but if they fail it, they take the full damage and you learn where their location is specifically. This ability deals an extra 1d6 damage or 2d6 at level 18, which is actually quite fair considering all the other things you're getting with it. And the fact that you can go around corners with this attack and not have to worry about things like half cover or 3/4 cover affecting your attack roll either, then this is potentially a very, very good pick. So Shadow Arrow isn't too bad, it's just not one that I think I would use. The damage is quite reasonable on it. 2d6 psychic damage is nice, it's not something that's often resisted, and 4d6 at level 18 is always very good. But at the same time, the occlusion effect, it just doesn't really do enough for me. The fact is that they can still see up to 5 feet in front of them, so they're not going to be walking into traps, they're not going to be falling off of ledges. Chances are that it's not going to be as useful as just banishing them or rooting them to the floor. This effect only lasts until the start of your next turn as well, so unfortunately it's just not a great ability in my opinion. Although if you guys have had some success with it, tell me all about it. I like the idea of the Arcane Archer, but unfortunately it just doesn't grab me where it's tender, if you know what I mean. I want to like this class, I really do, but the restriction on how often you can use your abilities does seem a little bit awkward to me. I suppose considering how potentially damaging they are, the offset of only having 2 uses per rest isn't really all that bad. But additionally, I think this class could have been a hell of a lot more if perhaps we'd given it to the wizard instead. If we went old school and allowed the wizard to enchant arrows with certain spells and effects, then it could probably be a lot more of an interesting and potentially more useful archetype. But as it is, going to the fighter, I don't think it quite does the job. At least not in the way that the archetype is intended to work. So next up is the Cavalier. Now I'm not a big fan of mounted combat myself. However, there's enough in this class that it can perform its function admirably either with or without the use of the mount. This is the kind of flexibility that I'm looking for because it allows you to still have a character concept but not be completely useless if that aspect isn't available at that time. So there's still enough going on that you can still be an active party member even if you haven't got your mount with you at the time. Because I personally like the classic dungeon crawl style of adventure, and getting a mount down into those deep depths isn't the easiest thing to do and is typically very impractical. So first up is one of our filler abilities. Now don't get me wrong, I love having extra skills. I think if the game handles skills well, then it really adds to my personal enjoyment of the game. However, it doesn't change the fact that one ability where you just gain an extra skill or gain an extra use of something that you've already got access to, it doesn't require much thought. That little gripe aside, however, you get your choice of either animal handling, history, insight, performance, or persuasion, or you can choose to learn another language of your choice, which might not actually be bad considering that languages aren't an easy thing to come by in this game. Again, like we said with the Arcane Archer, pick the one that helps you define your character the most. So the first of your main abilities is Born to the Saddle. Why they didn't call it Born in the Saddle, I don't know, but I didn't write this thing. Regardless of that fact, however, you gain advantage on saving throws to avoid falling if you're potentially going to be knocked off your mount. Additionally, if you are knocked off your mount and you fall less than 10 foot of distance, then you can fall on your feet, presumably without taking damage, and you also gain the ability to dismount from your mount by only using 5 feet worth of your movement speed, which is also very nice. These abilities are fairly straightforward. They don't exactly do a lot, and they're not going to be things you're going to be needing all the time, but I do tend to like abilities that do 2 or 3 different things, because then it shows a mastery of that particular aspect of life or adventuring. So I like the fact that it's doing more than just the one thing, which shows that you've had a lot of training and a lot of experience being a mounted rider. So that's something I do like about the ability. Other than that, however, it's not really offering you much, and the real prize is what's coming next. Unwavering Mark is an ability that I find really exciting. I can't help but be reminded of playing a Guardian fighter in Neverwinter when I see this. So first up, I think it's important to note that you can actually mark as many creatures as you can potentially hit in a round. So that's always a good start. So what happens when the creature is marked is that that creature gets disadvantage against any creature that it attacks other than you. So essentially what you've got is a built-in goading attack, and because you can mark any number of creatures as long as you have enough attacks to deal with it, you are constantly able to keep up that goading attack effect. The goading attack reference is just to make it easier for people to understand exactly what's happening. In addition to that, you also gain the ability to make a special attack against any creature that damages someone other than you. So what you're getting is an advantage attack which you can use as a bonus action on your round in retaliation to someone damaging another party member. In addition to the advantage, this attack also gains additional damage equal to half your fighter level, so it really helps to remind your enemies which is the greater threat. The theme behind this ability is absolutely amazing. My only concern with it is because the creatures that you're marking have disadvantage on attack rolls against targets other than you, how often are they actually going to be able to effectively hit other targets and deal damage? And the question then is, how often do you get to make your retaliation attack. Despite that, however, you only actually have a number of these retaliation attacks equal to your strength modifier, and you only get those per long rest. So you're not going to be getting lots and lots of these. You're only going to be getting a few a day. If you're lucky enough to have 20 strength, then yes, you can obviously make more. But your average character might be looking at a 15 or a 16, so 2 to 3 of these attacks might be all you're getting in the beginning, which isn't really a lot. But it's not really the main prize. The prize really is the goading effect, which you can apply with every strike. So I try to look at it as just something a little bit extra added on, a little bit more bang for your buck, and try not to think too much about the potentials of whether you can or can't make your attacks effectively by using this ability. Warding Maneuver is very similar in its applicability in that you can use it a number of times equal to your Constitution modifier, so the same arguments apply for this as it does for the previous ability. What's amazing about this ability, however, is it's again an ability that never gets wasted. So if your target is hit, you can then use this ability. You can then add a d8's worth of AC to that target, and then they have to basically check again, and if the target is still hit, then they get a resistance to that damage. So they either don't get hit at all, or they get resistance to the damage. So either way, they're going to be taking less damage. I love this. I really like this sentinel aspect that this character has. So few classes are built to defend, mostly because so few players actually know how to defend properly. So having a class that's tailor-made really helps people to understand the intricacies of combat, and that's something that I think Warding Maneuver helps with a lot. Since you're limited to only one reaction per round, however, you do have to be a little bit selective about how you use it, but despite that fact, it's still a really good ability in my opinion. And D8 is quite a lot to add to an AC. Understand that this is a game that's dealing with smaller numbers than it was before, so a D8 is worth quite a bit of value when you compare it to the general amount of AC that people tend to be working with anyway. Speaking of the Sentinel feat, however, Hold the Line works in a very similar way. As long as a creature moves at least 5 feet or more within your reach, you can potentially make an attack of opportunity against it, and then that creature's speed will become 0. A great ability for locking down potentially mobile combatants. This speed reduction lasts until the end of the current turn. You can only use this once per turn because you only have one reaction, but regardless of that fact, it's still a useful ability for keeping the battlefield under control. Ferocious Charger seems to be a well thought out ability because they've written it in such a way that it becomes applicable to being either on foot or being mounted, so it's nice that they've thought of that. If you move at least 10 feet before making an attack, as long as you're moving in a straight line, you can choose to have that creature that you hit make a strength saving throw, and if they fail, they get knocked prone, which is a really nasty condition to have. I can see this ability having a lot of synergy with the Charger feat, so you could actually start to make quite a competent Charger build if you were using this particular archetype. It's probably worth mentioning as well that if you so desire, once you've made this attack, you can choose to mark that target as well. And finally, Vigilant Defender allows you to make a special reaction that you can take once on every creature's turn, except your own. You can only use it for an attack of opportunity, and you can't use it on the same turn that you take your normal reaction, but nevertheless, you're still getting all of these extra attacks of opportunity. That's insane! So Vigilant Defender with marking effects and potentially Hold the Line as well? Someone please enchant my weapon! I can see this being a top contender for one of the best defending characters in the game. As an archetype, I think it works really, really well. Potentially, you can make a lot of interesting builds with it. You can go full defender, you can get an interesting charger concept. With all those additional attacks opportunity in the far, far future, perhaps even some kind of massive damage dealing Great Weapon Master effect. So there's a lot that you can do with it. I think if you're sick and tired of everyone going on about the Battle Master and how great it is, then it might be worth going for the Cavalier, because there's still so much that you can do. You can still put out a really good amount of attacks, potentially dealing lots of damage if you build it correctly, and still be really useful when it comes to defending the rest of your party as well. A really interesting class, mechanics that have a lot of potential, and it's one that I think I would enjoy playing myself.
Don't ask.
In my youth, I had a serious fascination with feudal Japan and the times when samurais were the great heroes of legend. So it's something that I've always wanted to translate over to D&D, but unfortunately I just never got the opportunity. So it's nice that they're including a samurai character. So your starting bonus proficiency is one from either history, insight, performance or persuasion, or you can choose to have the additional language. We've already gone over this twice already, and you already know my thoughts, so let's just move on. So the samurai's fighting spirit is usable 3 times per long rest. 3 times might not sound like a lot, but because it's giving you all these extra temporary hit points, you're actually gaining quite a buffer of additional hits that you can potentially take. So when you get at top end, you're gaining 15 per use. That's a pool of 45 additional temporary hit points that you can call upon at any time of the day. Additionally, the attack that you use in order to trigger this ability gains advantage as well. An advantage attack is always nice. Admittedly, you do have to use your bonus action in order to activate all of this, but it could be a good trade-off, since temporary hit points only last until they're depleted. There's no upper time limit on them, or at least until you take your next long rest, so it's a very useful ability to start out most encounters with. Regardless, however, the first ability of an archetype is typically the core ability, and it's one of the main focuses of why you would take the class in the first place. So for it to only be usable 3 times per long rest, it really does seem like it pales in comparison to a lot of the other options that are available in the other archetypes. Elegant Courtier isn't really my thing. I like the bonus to wisdom saving throw proficiencies that you can get, and I do like the fact that if you already have that for some reason, you can swap it out for either intelligence or charisma. What I do find a little bit unnecessary about it, however, is that you get a wisdom bonus to your charisma persuasion tests. It kind of makes some sense in that you know what to say and therefore you also have the charisma to say it, but doesn't it just make you a bit of a mad character? You want to have a decent strength or dexterity, maybe both, depending on what kind of fighter you want to be. Upfront fighters really ought to have a decent constitution anyway. If you're going to have an ability that requires you to be interacting a lot, you need a good charisma, and in order to make this particular ability work, you have to have a decent wisdom as well. You're just asking for too much from a player, I think. Unless you're having a conversationally heavy game like Kingdoms of Kalamar or Eberron, for example, then you're probably not going to be using this an awful lot. And I do happen to think that a good ability is one that you're going to be making use of most of the time. One that you can always rely upon. So Elegant Courtier, not really as useful as one might hope. By level 10, when you roll initiative, if you haven't got any uses of your fighting spirit at the time, then Tireless Spirit will give you another use at the beginning of your initiative. So it means you can afford to be a bit more liberal with your uses of fighting spirit. Again, this is a useful ability. It's good that you get it at level 10 and not later, the way the Arcane Archer does, but still, it's still a little bit of a filler ability in my opinion. However, this ability is more useful in the sense that you do get to use it early at level 10, you do get to take advantage of it at the beginning of an initiative, which is more than likely when you're going to want to have that buffer of temporary hit points ready to use. So it's really not that bad. Again, it does still have the same problems that the Arcane Archer ability has, but I find this one to be a tad more flexible because it's an ability you want to just have running, and it's one that you can make use of earlier in your level progression. Rapid Strike is nice. It allows you to forego advantage and gives you an additional attack against that target. Understand that fighters are characters that have multiple attacks anyway, more so than any other class in the entire game, so you're already getting a lot of attacks. By this point in your level progression, having 4 this early is pretty good. Normally you'd have to wait till level 20 in order to get a 4th attack, and of course when you hit level 20 this would just translate into a 5th attack. But still, how many attacks do you honestly feel you need? The 2 benefits I can potentially see about this is A, it doesn't require your bonus action, so that means things like dual weapon fighting or Polearm Master are still on the table, and B, that you can activate it practically whenever you want through uses of your fighting spirit, because that's going to give you an advantage which you can then choose to trade off for your Rapid Strike. And finally we come to Strength Before Death. I can understand the concept of it, the whole death and honor thing. However, it's not an ability that seems to work very well, for the simple fact that When you're reduced to 0 hit points, but not killed outright, you can potentially take a reaction and gain an additional turn, which comes out of sequence. So you can really then go ahead and start making additional attacks against all the enemies that are around you in some kind of glorious final charge, if you will. But the problem I have with it is that how often are you going to be reduced to 0 hit points? Considering the fact you have a pool of 45 additional temporary hit points to use, and every initiative you take after you've used them, you still get additional temporary hit points through uses of your 10th level ability. So when are you going to have the opportunity to make this fantastic deathly charge? Again, I'm still not a fan of abilities that only happen when you're dying or practically dead anyway. I can see what they're intended to do, but I want a character archetype that's going to give me options that I can be using regularly. And that's part of my analysis, is that if I've got an ability that I never see because I'm constantly gaining temporary hit points, or my party is on top of their job keeping me healed up, or I'm playing tactically enough to avoid damage, then it's an ability that never gets any use. And that's part of why I don't like it. Also, it's just something that you may never see in your entire adventuring career. Admittedly, a lot of players don't have that much luck to not get reduced to 0 hit points, but the potential is there. I almost can't see the point in this ability because as a samurai who's advanced to level 18, you've probably fought so many battles, got so much experience, become practically a master swordsman in your own right, and now, at level 18, you finally get an ability that works only when you're near death. I find the samurai archetype to be somewhat unnecessary. In fact, it's something that you could probably create using a different fighter archetype. You only really want to concern yourself with the type of weapons, clothing, and armor that you're going to be using, and it's not much different in that sense. It seems to me that the samurai is just a filler archetype, and that's partially evident by the number of filler abilities that it has. I don't really want to put it down for the sake of putting it down, but it's not really doing it enough. It's not versatile enough. It's not creative enough to really warrant being an archetype in its own right. And that's a sad thing to say, but sometimes the truth is. So finally, it's time to rank these fighter archetypes. Which are the heroes of legend, and which are better off being resigned to the local militia? I wouldn't have thought that this would come in at 6, but unfortunately, the samurai just isn't doing enough. What it really boils down to is some extra hit points, an extra saving throw proficiency, some extra skill proficiencies, an extra attack. Just extra, but nothing that really grabs at the imagination. This was ultimately disappointing because it seems no matter how many times Wizards tried to do a samurai class, they really never managed to get it right. The champion suffers from the same problems that the samurai does. It's just extras added on, and it doesn't really have much options for customization. The only thing you can really change is your additional fighting style. As it is, however, the additional fighting style allows you more varied kinds of characters. It allows you to experiment more with different fighting styles. So you can have the destroyer, the protector, the finesse fighter. It's all available when it comes to the champion. It's just a little plain in how it achieves its role. The Arcane Archer comes with various types of special effects like curving shot, or the ability to infuse your arrows with magical energy, and specialist effects depending on the schools of magic from which you choose. So there's a lot there to give you some variety, but it still suffers in certain ways by having a low amount of arcane shots per day, and the fact that you are limited to one particular type of weapon in order to use any of your special abilities is something that hurts the archetype somewhat. I do get it though, the clue is in the name, but just having that tight restriction like that is going to put the Arcane Archer further down the ranking than most other archetypes normally would be. Combined with the limited amount of arcane shots you have per rest, and unfortunately the Arcane Archer just doesn't really hit the spot. This was actually a much more difficult choice than I initially thought it would be, but the Cavalier is a really good class. I really like this archetype. You can potentially build the class to be whatever it is you want through the use of feats and through your weapon selection, This archetype excels at what it was built to do. However, there are no drawbacks for deviating from that style. So if you want to build it in a different way, you can still be effective when it comes to combat. That being said, however, this is still a toe-to-toe fighter. You do need to be up close and personal. You do need to try to get the charges in. You do need to be next to your opponent or next to your ally if you want to make full use of your marks or your warding effects. So you are still a little bit limited. You can have a different weapon selection, but you're not going to be taking advantage of the reach from, say, polearms, and ranged weapons pretty much go out the window, if you'll excuse the pun. Regardless, however, the way you build your character can be complemented by the abilities that this archetype has, and there's still enough options within the weapon list that you can have something that really suits your particular preference or your aesthetic choices. You've got to love the Eldritch Knight. There's so much that you can really apply in the way of your spells when it comes to defining how your character approaches each situation. So things like personal buffs or good solid attacking evocations, you've got a good variety of spells that you can work with. Abjurations are there if you want to make for a decent defender, so you can really max out your AC in certain ways that other classes just wouldn't be capable of. So you can really kind of tailor it to a specific situation, or you can just build it in such a way that it performs one task really well. The one real gripe that I do have with it, however, is that if you want to have some personal improvement spells like transmutations, or you want to go with some debuffs or debilitations that you would get from, say, something like necromancy, you're not going to get very many of them. You can get hold of them at certain levels, but they are a little bit limited. So for the most part, you're having to just work with evocations and abjurations. These aren't bad spells, and they're a very good set of choices for the Eldritch Knight, but if you were to really customize a magical slash fighter character, then you would want a little bit more variety to pick from. I do like the interplay between sword and sorcery, however, how when you strike at a creature, you can undercut its defenses and give it disadvantage against the spells that you cast, so that's a really nice mechanic. I like how the arcane charge runs off of your action surge, so that when you do an action surge, you get that additional effect as well, so it improves some of the base abilities that the fighter has, so it doesn't feel so much like it's just magic that's been tacked on. It feels like it's more a part of the actual fighter himself when you add this archetype in, so I like the way it's been thought out. As it is now, I'm sold on the Eldritch Knight. I can see it being a fun class to play. And if you don't know whether to play a fighter or a wizard, then I would definitely suggest going straight down the middle with the Eldritch Knight. So there was absolutely no way the Battlemaster wasn't going to come in at first place, because it's just such an amazing archetype. You'll probably never see the same Battlemaster twice. It's completely customizable when it comes to your maneuvers. The amount of maneuvers that you get at your level progressions are very fair. You can choose to be really liberal with your application of your maneuvers, since you get so many of them to start with, and you can refresh them very easily through either a short or long rest. And of course, from the moment you pick this up, you're already doing an exceptional amount of extra damage through the d8 that you'll get from your initial superiority die. So it's a very, very strong class, and one that I would play over and over again. I really love fighter characters. There's so much freedom and customization that comes with them, it's unreal. Even back in 3.5, there was just feat after feat after feat after feat, which just meant that you could make the character be exactly what you wanted it to be, and no two would be the same. And the same is true here in 5th edition. You just pick a whole different variety of different special maneuvers, and you'll find that almost no two Battlemasters are alike. So the fighter analysis finally comes to a close. I know you've been waiting for it a long time, but hopefully we'll get back on track with some more consistency in the uploads. Regardless of that fact, however, hopefully you enjoyed it. Remember to like, leave a comment if there's anything interesting you'd like to add, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and with all that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.